Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast. This is part 2 of The Clown and I by Ryan Heffernan. Before we get started, here's just a recap of the book blurb. The Clown and I is a dangerous, steamy and soulful memoir for Ryan Heffernan, a man with bipolar disorder. Ryan really should have lived in another time. International celebrities get sweaty and spanked, and life can be grandiose. But personal ruination forever lurks in this confronting exploration of how one man tries to fit in and make sense of the elusive real world, laced with love, lust, heartbreak, bad boozing and poverty. Clown and I is one-of-a-kind entry from a man in this genre. It is a dreamy and philosophical global odyssey, a diamond sparkle, spiritual and sensual insight into bipolar, stormy personal relationships and the hard street truths of dicey mental health in a society that won't always yield. But hope, beauty, dream chasing and Ryan's wondrous son are the undisputed emperors in this eccentric universe. This is One Little Boy Laid Bare. So let's just jump straight into our discussion about mania in bipolar disorder.
I also found that reading his account of the mania, if you were a bystander and you had limited knowledge associated with that person and potentially the condition of bipolar, how difficult it would be for you to understand if you didn't know what was going on. Because his behaviour is so out of what would be considered the conventional norm for a society. Do you know what I'm
Yeah, I mean, at? He finds that's why it's difficult for him when he finds jobs, because he says he will be the most creative and most loyal and most dedicated employee that you have. And then he goes through an episode and suddenly you won't see him for 3 months. But then when he's back to being that loyal, supportive, amazing employee. But
and you can see why his employers would have issues with that. His colleagues would have issues with that. And it's this kind of thing where we, as people, it's not a case of judging them, but it's because the behaviour isn't considered normal and different. How do you then react to that?
Yeah, and actually, recently in my workplace, we were joking around about, people being able to go on holiday during term time as a, teacher and stuff. And someone turned around and was like, oh, well, let's all take a sickie. Yeah. And I went, all right, I'm first. And then someone turned around and said, no, your sickness is already too high. I don't think you should go first. And to me, I knew they only meant it as a joke, but actually, when I'm sick, I'm genuinely sick. When I'm sick, I'm not actually.
You're not just sat home under the duvet, chilling out,
watching telly, doing what I want.
Well, you probably are because you can't move because you're in that much pain. But you are. There is the pain associated with it, and the discomfort, and the fact that you can't physically stand. It's not just because.
And it was this idea that
I'd have a sickie.
Yeah, and it was this idea that I'd had so much time off, so I didn't deserve any more. And it was like, well, hold on a sec. When I'm sick, I'm sick. It's not me taking a sick day, a personal day, or if you're in America and stuff. This is me actually being ill. It's not a fun day, and I thought
that's this misconception, isn't it?
Yeah.
That they're going, well, you've had too much time off. You're just enjoying yourself.
So you can imagine him coming back after his 3 months of having a depressive state and then wanting a day's holiday and then going, well, you've just had 3 months off.
But I wasn't functioning as what you would consider normal. I was in a place where it was so dark that I was contemplating taking my own life. It's not like it was just this fun excursion or anything.
Yeah. So I do think that even without people realising it, they make these judgments and they see sickness as time off. Whereas actually sickness is sick. It's not time off on holiday.
But you wouldn't have that thought if, say, for example, he went and broke his leg and he couldn't get into work because he would have to, say, get public transport to get to work. You wouldn't have that same connotation, would you? If for mental health reasons. No. You have this, or if someone was having to take time off to go into hospital to get cancer treatment.
Well, it's invisible illness.
Yeah.
Isn't it? And, as a fibromyalgia myself as MS, often it is invisible. It's that idea of people parking in disabled places and you not seeing why they're using a disabled bay.
Exactly. And the outrage that people then leave notes on people's cars going, you don't need to be there. Hang on a minute. You have no idea about my personal life and the fact that today is a good day.
Yeah.
So, and it's heartbreaking. And if someone did that to me, I would probably lose.
Cool.
Yeah. I was going to say something a bit more rude, but thank you for supplying lose my cool, because I would lose my cool, because how dare they judge me on a good day? This is a good day. I'm able to leave the house.
Yeah.
Back the hell off.
I know. And the thing is we do, and it is unfortunate. And I don't know how far we can go to get to a point, because also people say to me, oh, well, there are people that do take sick days. And it's like, well, how do you
distinguish between the two?
Yeah. And I have often said to, for example, my line manager, who I don't always get on with, and have had to say to him, well, I'm a professional. I am an honest person. You need to trust me at some point. I can't prove everything that I do and I say in my job, outside my job, when I'm off sick, when I'm here. You actually, at some point, as my line manager, have to trust that we are both professionals and I am an honest person. And if you don't, then this relationship isn't going to work.
And you wouldn't be taking advantage of it. It's not in your nature. And I don't know, maybe it's more common in other jobs, which I don't know, they wouldn't necessarily consider themselves professional. I don't know. Again, I'm starting to make judgments about people, which I don't want to do.
I would rather try and believe that everyone is honest than not.
Me too.
But then saying that, I know people who have taken sick days because they wanted a day off.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's people who have done that
make everyone else have this bad reputation.
Yeah. But you always get a few bad apples in the barrel. You know, that's the way it is.
Exactly. Like, there are health professionals out there that turn around and are extremely rude to people with mental health conditions. I mean,
I've been told that, you know, all I want is pain medication.
Oh, of course. You sponger.
When actually,
drug addict.
When actually I'm in serious pain and I need help.
Yeah.
And it's similar in the way that, you know,
but that's a doctor, isn't it? This is someone that, I don't know, I would expect, they are human beings. Yes, I get that. But you would expect that in some ways that they would be more understanding than the average Joe public.
And I do think that he's been very lucky in the people that he's met and in the health professions. I think if he was in a different country, in a different hospital, in a different location, I think he might have had a different experience as well.
Yeah, I have to admit that, so this book is set in Australia. It is, Ryan currently is living in Brisbane. I have been to Brisbane. I spent a couple of weeks in Brisbane, but I spent 3 years between Newcastle, New South Wales and Sydney.
And he does move to Sydney for a while.
He does, yeah. So the monorail, I remember the monorail. I was there when they took it out, and I remember it going past Darling Harbour and across the river and stuff. So I was some of the things he talks about, I'm like, yeah, I remember that. And it brings back lots of memories for me. But I was diagnosed with borderline personality in Australia, and I'm not sure how the system works in terms of emergency care here, because I haven't had to use it, touch wood.
I don't think you'd necessarily have got the same care, especially when you did move back and you took your notes to your GP and you showed them and you told them your diagnosis, and, you know, they came out with a response of, oh, you won't get that diagnosed here, or that it's not recognised here, or
you won't get the level of support, because I was fortunate enough to be able to go into a fantastic program in Newcastle where they're basically doing a study where they were randomising people into either DBT or just conversational therapy, and I was put into the DBT group. But speaking to the therapist there, she said that it was fantastic. I would have been probably successful in either of the programs, but the fact that I went into a year-long program without having to fight as much, because I mean, trying to access DBT in the UK is difficult, and I was so grateful to Australia, but it was a program, because it was this part of this study and I was part of this study group, that was free to me. And I think in the UK, I don't know if I would have been diagnosed with what I was diagnosed with. I definitely don't think I would have been in the DBT program without having to go private for it. Yeah. So there's just so much difference.
But then you also don't know if it's a bit of a postcode lottery sometimes. If you were in a different place in the country, you might have got this.
Yeah.
And talking to our secret psychiatrist who works for the NHS, there are options and there are people that understand, depending on where you are and what you're going on and what the funding is and what the priorities of that healthcare area is. So I do think in the UK, from what we understand, it is very different depending on what and where and who's doing different things.
And again, I'm talking about what I've read in the media, because I haven't necessarily had to access the kind of trauma, you know, when you get this, it's really emergency, it's not trauma, it's emergency care for mental health. You get the fact that people have to be at the point of threatening to take their own lives and to hurt themselves before they're getting the help that they need.
Yeah.
And it only seems to be in extreme cases. And I would love to hear from people out there if they have had a different experience with the NHS.
I agree, because I think that it will differ depending on where you are. And unfortunately, we've got an NHS that is extremely overworked, understaffed, underfunded, and it does mean that that is going to have an effect on care, because emergency physical problems are taking precedence over mental problems, and they are having to be much more reactionary. So it is those that are threatening to commit suicide or actually attempting to commit suicide that get treated on a higher priority than those that are saying, look, I just don't feel right, this keeps happening to me. If you describe some of the lifestyle that he was going on, again, people might say, well, actually, it's your lifestyle, it's your choice, just don't choose to go abroad and go on a bender.
So whilst editing this podcast, I listened back to what we were saying about one experience that I had with a GP, and I just wanted to add in a little bit more to clarify my position. This is only one experience that I had with a GP, and I'd like to say that this has not always been the case. I have also had some extremely positive experiences, particularly with my mental health diagnosis, and not all doctors are the same. There are also differences between different countries, and I know that we speak a lot about the NHS, but just remember it's going to be different in America, Australia, and other countries. And the NHS and other countries will prioritise those that are an emergency over those that are not in immediate danger. But regardless of this, I would highly recommend that you go and seek help if you are needing it.
So one of the things that we see is that, or read, is that Ryan has, when he looks back at his past history, has identified that one of his triggers seems to be international travel, where he goes on an airplane. When he gets to the destination, so for example, he goes to Thailand and to various other places. So if you're in Australia, those are the places that you go to. In the UK, we head off to Europe. I went to Fiji when I was out in Australia because that was a holiday. But Bali, places like that, Indonesia, Vietnam, all of those kind of areas
that he goes to.
And those are the areas that he goes to. And we see that he becomes manic when he gets there. And he is like, I don't have any idea why I went through those behaviours. Like, there was this one point where he describes eating the beating heart of a snake, which was
awful.
quite...
I hated that part of the book, I'm afraid.
It was a bit like, wow, okay.
But even he's saying, wow, I can't believe I did this.
Yeah.
Like, this is what I made sure, and I had to do this, and I had to go through this, that, and the other. And he's saying, like, this is the extreme behaviour I was experiencing. I don't know why, but this is what it was. But he found this is one of his triggers.
Exactly.
Is his travel.
And he goes off to America, and in America he ends up in quite a lot of sexually explicit situations. And I think in some ways it is refreshing that he is able to speak so openly about his sexuality, and the fact that his therapist also states that this is going to be a big part of your life because it's better than drugs and the alcohol.
Because at first he's like, look, I don't want to offend you. I don't want to embarrass
are you okay
you.
with this? I'm just about to go through my sexual exploits with you.
Yeah, after he's had like a week-long sort of, sexual experiences and things. But she's like, no, this is a part of your condition, and actually it's safer than you going and using drugs. So actually it's an outlet that actually is much safer. A bit like when you've said when you've had the urges to self-harm, and instead of self-harming or
drinking,
self-medicating, you might eat instead.
Yep.
And actually that is the, if
lesser
you're going
of all the evils.
Yeah, the lesser of the evils that you could have done. And I think it is important to sometimes recognise that you have to do some things that are bad for us sometimes, or some things that other people might conceive bad for you, but actually it's the best thing for you at that time.
Yeah, and sod everyone else who is judging you.
He's got to survive, he's got to get himself through, and he has to,
if sex is the way for him to do that, why not?
Yeah, and
as long as he's not hurting anyone else, and that's what she makes very clear.
As long as it's consensual, as long as you're not harming anyone, and you're aware of sexual health by STIs and all that kind of malarkey, as long as you're safe and you're healthy, what is the problem
with taking that as a way to express yourself?
Yeah.
There isn't any. And I do also think that as a society we are a bit squeamish.
I think the British
sex.
nature of
I don't think it's just British. I think it's Americans. I think it's Australians. I think there are definitely cultures out there that are much more open to these things. But I don't know, did you find it quite difficult to read those particular parts? Because I know that you said that the repetition of
I think I didn't need to know everything. I think the way I saw it was actually, to me, sexual experiences are behind closed doors.
But is that your British sensibility?
And it probably is. Actually, I like to keep my private life about my sex life private. But some other people want to talk about theirs, and that is their prerogative. But I wouldn't engage in that. I wouldn't necessarily talk about my sex life in as much detail.
I don't think I probably would either, but I don't know if I found it that difficult, if that makes sense. It didn't really bother me that I was reading these things about what he got up to. I was just like, really? I never knew you could do that kind of thing. Maybe
it's more of an education.
He was just enlightening me about these things that I'm so sweet and innocent about, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So again, it's differences in preference, I think.
Yeah.
At this point, rather than judging him for his lifestyle, it's just we were looking at the way he's written his book, and your British sensibilities were a bit, I'm rubbing her leg now, were a bit more delicate.
I think
me,
I also...
maybe.
I probably have more of a preference for where we look at fiction books with a factual element rather than our factual books. And I don't know why that is, but, and I do love a good biography, so an autobiography.
Well, that's good, because the next one you're reading is another.
Yeah, but I love a good story. And I think because it's someone's life, they don't always have the story that someone would plan to have, because it's not written
as contrived.
No, and it's fiction. As a fiction writer, you have an artistic license. With your own life,
it is your own life.
Yeah, and if you hadn't told it true to the way it was, like we were saying about... Yeah, and like we said, if we didn't have the son involved, it wouldn't be the same story and it wouldn't be true to his life. And I do think that might be one of the reasons as well, that, I do prefer a good fiction and a good fantasy story and stuff. So maybe that's what it was as well. It didn't really have the same flow as a fiction book would.
No. Well, the next book that we have coming up, just to prime you now, is we're going to be reading a book by Diane Harwood, which is about her postpartum bipolar disorder diagnosis. So she has her second child, and she then has this issue where she ends up being extremely manic, and she is then diagnosed with bipolar. And in comparison, yes, it's a woman this time that is suffering with bipolar. She is a new mum, and there are these differences, but the way that she writes her book is completely different in the way that Ryan writes his.
Well, it's different styles.
There's different styles, but there's also the fact that there isn't as much... She does talk about her time where she is addicted to prescription medication. She does talk about her time where she has issues with alcohol. But it doesn't seem to be to the extent that Ryan has had these things. And I don't know if that's because of the way it's been written. She doesn't want to share all the nitty-gritty, whereas Ryan has been quite open about the things that he's done.
Yeah.
But the mania, although it is extreme at times, doesn't seem as shocking as what Ryan portrays.
Once we've done both books,
we should do a bit of a comparison between the two, just to talk about, again, it's two different people's experience of the same condition. And we do have another one coming up later on after that's about bipolar. So maybe we could do a little bipolar recap at some point between all of them.
That sounds great.
So another thing that I wanted to pick up on was the fact that Ryan has this diagnosis of bipolar, he has these different relationships, and how he finds having those relationships with a partner extremely difficult, which it must be extremely difficult because so
some of them are much more
supportive and understanding,
and he actually I think he is very understanding. Once he has his diagnosis, he is very understanding when people can't cope with it, and he says,
this is going to be difficult, this is part of me.
And not everyone is the kind of person who can understand and, support at the same time.
See, now I would like to think that I would be supportive of someone in this position. If they were my partner, I would like to hope that, but I don't know if I could.
Yeah.
Particularly with the way that some of the behaviours he exhibits. I don't know if that's because in some ways I'm thinking about my borderline personality and the fact that they would be quite triggering to me.
To me, the times when he disappears and you don't know what he's up to, and
that would drive me crazy.
The fact that one of his relationships, he possibly slept with a prostitute while they were on holiday together and things like that on their honeymoon. Some of these things that if you heard that about about anybody, you would think it was unforgivable and, you know, why are they still together, blah, blah, blah. But again, it's because of his impulsivity, doesn't always necessarily remember these things. And then does it mean that it counts or not? And how do you get past that? How can you trust him and to
have
be
enough
faithful?
Trust issues anyway,
yeah, I think the same with myself. So I do think that you would have to be a very understanding person, and you would have to trust that when he said he didn't remember something,
that he didn't remember
and he wasn't just using it to cover up or an excuse.
This is a convenient
and
excuse.
Again, it goes back to, you know, what I was saying before, like my colleagues believing and trusting that person is honest and good rather than being otherwise. But it must be particularly difficult.
Definitely. And another thing that just popped into my head is the fact that he is put on some medication and the side effects of the medication he takes. So he is prescribed Seroquel, which is a mood stabilizer, which is something that I actually take for sleep. So I suffer with insomnia. I take a low dose of Seroquel, 25 milligrams at night, and that helps me get to sleep. For him, he takes 200 milligrams. I take 25, and that can knock me out quite significantly. And he talks about how he takes his dose, and his son is quite small at this time, and he wakes up to find his son in a complete state because he has slept through him crying, and he doesn't know how long he's been like this. And the fact that some of these medications are extremely harsh to the individual that's taking them.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that, knowing that he, in some ways, was almost neglecting his child at the point of taking this medication, because that was a side effect?
Yeah, I think that he then comes up with different ways, and I think that shows that he's got the responsibility.
And the forethought to go, hang on a minute, if I take this early enough, I will be awake when my son needs me in the morning.
Yeah, a bit like, I know that I can sleep through several different alarms.
Yes.
And I am actually quite a light sleeper.
Yes.
But
do you like it how I'm like, yes,
yeah.
She is. So, we used to live in the same house. I had the room above, so it's a 3-story house. You could hear me walking around if I was having a night of insomnia upstairs. But yet, in the morning, when your alarm went off,
my 5 different alarms.
Like 15 times. Yeah. And we had to sometimes come and knock on the door to make sure you'd even gotten out of bed. So, yeah I definitely know that.
Yeah. And there is something in me that just is able...
Mornings, no.
Especially if I know if I've had a migraine and I've gone to sleep with a migraine, I am unlikely to be woken up by any particular alarm of any kind. I've even had the light ones that meant to wake you up with the sun. I've had radios. I've had loud noises. I sent
the dog in. That usually gets her
up because
she snogs your face off. She's like, I love you.
Yeah. But yeah, and so I would be worried, and I think you'd have to put things in place to make sure. But then I also know when I do have other people staying with me, it does make me more alert and more awake, and I then sleep lighter. So I do think our bodies adapt, and he does make sure that he's up and early in time. Yeah.
But it's just in some ways noting that these medications that are prescribed for certain mental health conditions can be quite
the side effects
difficult.
Can sometimes be worse.
Exactly.
For a lot of these things.
Exactly. I mean, this particular drug also promotes weight gain, but he puts a lot of stuff into making sure he's living a healthy lifestyle and so on, so he does lots of exercise. And in some ways, the exercise also helps with him being able to regulate his mood better. But there's a whole host of different side effects associated with these drugs that people take to try and help with their stabilising of their mood.
And I think with something like this, it must be particularly difficult to stabilise because you've got the extremes of ups and downs, whereas
if you are up,
your chemicals are a certain way
to pull it down. But then when do you then start taking the antidepressant to boost you back up, so to speak?
Yeah, and often a lot of these medications you have to be weaned off of and weaned on and things like that. So that again creates its own kind of issues and problems and stuff.
And I think it's difficult, and I'm hoping, now this is something that we're hoping to arrange, is that Ryan is heading over to the UK in a couple of weeks' time. So I'm hoping to head into London to speak to him about his book and about how he's dealing with his bipolar, and just get a little bit of an insight. If you have any questions for Ryan, let me know. I will ask those. And I'm hoping that he's not triggered by the long journey over, because it will just be difficult for him to be able to regulate his mood and emotions and stuff.
Yeah, but it'd be nice to speak to him if we can.
It'd be fantastic to speak to him if we can. And yeah, so any questions, let us know. Next week we will be speaking to the secret psychiatrist, and we're going to be looking at bipolar disorder in more detail. We're also going to have a look at bipolar and just aggression generally in mental health. And so that will be next week's. And our next book will be this book by Diane Harwood, which is Birth of a New Brain, which is about postpartum bipolar disorder. So it'd be similar in terms of the condition that we're talking about, but from a different perspective. And with Diane, we see that she's actually medication resistant. So she goes through all of these different medications, trying to find one that works for her. I was so desperate for Diane to find some kind of solution to help her manage her bipolar. And so you are there kind of going, please, please, please find something that helps you.
Frustrating.
Exactly. Like how when you read the book, you'll see the emotions and stuff. And I just felt so awful all the way through. But anyway, I'm digressing.
Yeah.
Exactly. We'll talk about this in more detail in the next couple of weeks.
So that was part 2 of The Clown and I by Ryan Heffernan. If you would prefer to get the entire episode in one go, please go to Patreon at patreon.com/MHBC and donate as little as $2 a month to get the full episode every Monday. Thanks for listening, and remember, it's okay to not be okay, and if you're not okay, talk. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you need additional help with your mental health, please contact the Samaritans on 116-123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Our next book will be Birth of a New Brain, Healing from Postpartum Bipolar Disorder by Diane Harwood. And our next episode with the secret psychiatrist will be about postpartum bipolar disorder. If you'd like to find out more about the MHBC podcast, please visit our website, mentalhealthbookclub.com. We really hope that you enjoy this podcast, and we would like to hear what you think. Please head over to Twitter and follow us at MHBC_podcast, or head over to Facebook and follow our Facebook page, which is Mental Health Book Club. If you would like to show your support further, please share us with your family and friends and leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. We are now on Patreon. Please head over to patreon.com/MHBC to donate as little as $2 a month to the Mental Health Book Club podcast. As a result of your donation, you will get early access to some of our episodes, you will get specific episodes that are only for patrons, and you'll be eligible to be entered into free prize draws.